If you ever set type by hand, stared into the glow of a Linotype machine, or argued over the true birthplace of desktop publishing, then you already owe a debt to my guest in today's program, Frank Romano. Frank, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
I can't believe this is the first time we've chatted. I studied you before this. I stalked you, sir. And you're like a hero to me. You are considered by many now the quintessential historian of printing. You've lived it, you've shaped it. And in many ways, if I may be so bold, you've saved it as the founder of the Museum of Printing in Haverhill, Massachusetts, which I'm going to come and visit. Is that where you are right now, sir?
That's where I am right now in our meeting room at this stage. We have a whole crew of people working today. We're getting our Linotype running. We have a Ben Franklin Press. They're coming from a radio station to do an article on us later on. It's going to be a busy day. More
than just finding this facility and making it thrive to keep us, keeping it like the archive of this incredible art of printing. You're the author, correct me if I'm wrong, of more than 60 books in typography, print history, and publishing. This is your life's work to preserve the story. Am I right, sir? 79
books.
I have 60. I am so sorry that
79. Yeah, I'm working on 80 right now. I've written the first book on every new technology that affected newspapers.
All right, so with your permission, sir, we got to make a buck here. I want my audience to stand by because what was it? I want to know what it was like to work at Mergenthaler Linotype. Did I say that correct, sir?
You certainly did.
And I studied that name, Mergenthaler Linotype. And why does Frank say desktop publishing nearly killed craftsmanship? I found that quote, sir. Don't answer that yet, because we got to make a buck and do this commercial first.
This episode of E&P Reports is exclusively sponsored by Blocks Digital, formerly Town News. Even though the name has changed, their commitment to the media industry is as strong as ever. Blocks Digital is now even better positioned to deliver integrated solutions like content management, audience development, advertising revenue, video management, and more. Join the over 2,000 news publishers worldwide that power their ongoing digital transformation with Blocks Digital, serving over 141 million monthly users who view over 6.5 billion pages of content each year. You can trust Blocks Digital to empower you, to connect you at scale with the community you need to reach. Blocks Digital, formerly Town News, now reimagined to help meet the news publishing challenges of tomorrow and beyond. Learn more at blocksdigital.com.
All right, Frank, you started in the industry at Mergenthaler. What was the atmosphere like? When was that? This is the dawn, correct me if I'm wrong, of cold type. And what do you miss most about those days?
Actually, I went to work for Mergenthaler in 1959.
Wow.
I was graduating high school in Brooklyn, New York. I went to my guidance counselor. I said, I need a job. He said, well, this company Mergenthaler is looking for people. I said, what do they do? He said, something to do with books. So I got interviewed. I was hired in the shipping department. Then I advanced to the mail room. I like to say that when I started there, I delivered the mail to the president. When I left, I wrote his speeches. It was a very paternalistic company. They had a medical plan. They had a pension plan because the company made money every day because those little brass matrices that ran in the Linotype wore out, and we would process 1 million a day. We employed 6,000 people in Brooklyn, New York, in these two gigantic buildings.
6,000. Wow.
And by the way, the company was formed because of the newspaper industry. The newspaper syndicate in 1870 banded together to invest in the technology to replace hand typesetting. It took 6 people to hand set 1 page of a daily newspaper. The Linotype could do it with 1 person. And so in 1886, Otmar Mergenthaler introduces the Linotype. It produces a line of type.
If I may interject, and this is boring maybe to you, but I went to high school in suburban Philadelphia in the 60s. and at junior high, I should say. And we had a print shop, and I actually operated a Linotype. to make my first little business card. We learned back
I'm
in the
talking
60s.
about.
Well, I did. I actually remember the smell and the boiling, and how it all dropped down. And you have one that actually works there at the museum, correct?
We have one of the few working linotypes in the United States.
I don't want to go to the museum just yet. I want to stay with you about the history. So you have actually been part of this transformation, as I have. I mean, I was more on the ad side of going from, the traditional legacy print product into digital. But over the last 6 decades, in your humble opinion, sir, what was the most disruptive shift that you saw? And which one was overrated? I mean, does that make sense? I mean, when people were looking at X, should have been looking at Y. And because you are an expert in this history, what do you think the most disruptive thing was, and what was the least disruptive, if I may ask you?
The one that we call desktop publishing.
Yes, sir.
Let me just go over the evolution for a second. You had handset type. That's replaced by the Linotype. And for 80 years, the Linotype is the dominant machine for setting type. Then we see photo typesetting come in. And for 40 years, there were 40 companies fighting for that marketplace.
Yes.
But then when Steve Jobs introduced the Macintosh, a program called PageMaker from another company, PostScript for outputting fonts, and the ability to output to a high-resolution laser imaging set device, it changed the world. Now, the problem is it happened very slowly. So everyone thought that desktop publishing was just for cheap and dirty stuff. And then suddenly it starts to affect newspapers. I mean, there's not a newspaper today where the reporters aren't typing on terminals. And in many cases, that information is going right to typesetting. It bypasses all the processes that used to be part of the mainstream of a newspaper. And so desktop publishing put the control back in the reporter's hands and the editor's hands. And it just changed the world. Before that, the union controlled everything because they controlled the machine.
Right. Amazing. Okay, so now here you are in Haverhill, and you found this Museum of Printing. Was there a particular moment in your life where you realized this history needed to be preserved? It should not be lost to the dust of the future?
Actually, the museum started in 1978.
Really?
At that time, I had been publishing a magazine called Type World, which I started from scratch, built it up to 82,000 circulation. And because I had extra money, I bought New England Printer and Publisher magazine. So I got to know the publisher of the Boston Globe, Mr. Taylor.
Of course.
And so they were getting out of hot metal in 78 and letterpress printing. So I went to him and said, can we save some of this? There were 14 of us, publishers, printers, and others in the industry. Not only did he say yes, he found us free warehouse space to store everything in because we had no money, no place to put anything. And so for 10 years, we were in warehouses. And then we wound up in a building in North Andover, Mass., which was the old textile museum building. And so we started to build the Museum of Printing at that point in time. And then we outgrew that building and we moved to this one here in Haverhill. And now we're outgrowing this one. We have the largest collection of the equipment, the technology, and the printed material, the back issues of all the magazines, samples of type. We have the entire Linotype library, all the drawings for every Linotype typeface. Helvetica, Times Roman, they're all here. They went to the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian didn't want them. The Smithsonian closed down their printing exhibition. So we are now the oldest and largest museum dedicated to the printed word.
If we may, let's together announce this. Well, we're going to put it out in an official press release, but let's let the audience know that we have agreed at E&P to donate our actual print issues back to 1900 and send them up so they'll still have a home for many, 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 hopefully decades or centuries to come. Thank you so much.
I'm hoping that, by the way. Again, we have the complete bound issues of many of the magazines in the printing industry.
Amazing.
Like the Inland Printer, which started in 1881. That was the first magazine for printing in America. Not only do we have, it's also been scanned, which, by the way, we're going to do with most of our publications. And thank God you did it with E&P.
Thank you. All right. I want to give you a little bit. I started as a disc jockey. That's how I got into media. I was a pre-med at GW, and I always wanted to be a DJ. And I worked myself into an AM radio station, just doing anything, washing floors. And that's how I got into media. And my blood is radio. I got into the newspaper industry obliquely. but I was a morning DJ on AM with records, you know, back in the 70s. But when I now live in Nashville, and I'm setting you up to get your thoughts on this, I moved here to be closer to our daughter. They call this building in downtown Nashville the Batman Building. It's the AT&T building because it looked, no, those are radio towers. Nashville's history is the old Grand Ole Opry. WSM's tower in Brentwood that is iconic. And when I was at the Country Music Hall of Fame Museum, I watched a woman tell all these kids looking into some kind of a display, that's called a radio. She said, people used to sit around this and listen. When people come to your museum, the kids especially, do you get goosebumps? What goes on?
By the way, I personally handle 32 school groups a year. Homeschool, grade school, high school, college. I'm getting a lot of senior citizens as well. But I love the young kids, especially the very young ones. They're really excited by all of this. And I give them a little presentation about typography. Because I say the one thing we all have in common is we all use type. At one time, that wasn't the case. You had typewriters, and then you had printers who did type. But the common person never did that. And now everyone is using Times Roman. Everyone is using Helvetica. It's a very common practice. So the young kids are really interested in, you know what they're really interested in? The typewriters.
Seriously. I was going to ask, so is there one piece when you're walking through the halls that you just still stop and pause at? I mean, is there one that just sticks out that if your iconic historical piece in the museum?
Yes. As you come in the front door in a glass case is the world's first typewriter, the Scholes Glidden 1873.
Oh my! We're going to be definitely putting a picture of that up on the video version of this podcast.
I'll send you a copy of it.
I don't know if you have to, because when I went to Google, people are posting tons of photos from your museum online. Families to tour it. You're getting pretty damn popular, sir. I want you to know that.
I've wanted that typewriter for years, and you can't find them. And then one day, an elderly gentleman comes in. Turns out he had one. That's where the QWERTY keyboard came from. QWERTYUIOP. And you know that all the letters for the word typewriter are in that line.
I had no idea. No, I'm learning from this one. I think you just gave us our pull quote, sir.
And when Scholes was inventing the typewriter, he needed someone to test it. So he sent it to a guy in Washington, D.C., who was a court reporter. And he tested it, but he was intrigued with it. And he wanted to find a way to make it set type. And so he went to an inventor, he went to a machine shop in Washington, D.C., and by accident, he meets a man named Ottmar Mergenthaler, a German immigrant, who then starts inventing a machine. And their first investor is Stilson Hutchins. Stilson Hutchins was the founder of the Washington Post.
Oh, yes.
And so he puts together a syndicate of newspapers, and they invest, and Mergenthaler goes through 3 prototypes. We have the second one here. And then finally, in 1886, the Linotype machine is invented. So the typewriter and the Linotype are related.
Frank, I could talk to you for hours, but I'm going to let you in for a little secret you may already know, but attention spans in today's multimedia world are pretty, challenged. So we try to hold this show to about 20 minutes an episode, but this should be 3 hours. So I'm now going to let you put on your prognosticator or your historical expert hat. You have a quote that is there that I've seen called "Print is immortal." I dug this up when I Googled you. What do you mean by that? Print is immortal.
Well, you can't change it. See, the nice thing is when you look at a newspaper from the 1700s, no one is going to modify it. If you remember the book 1984, it opens with Winston Smith, the protagonist, changing history. And today, because everything we're doing is in electronic form, I wonder 100 years from now if it will still be in the same form, or somebody will have modified it to change its meaning to something in the past. Whereas print cannot be changed. And that's the great thing about print. It is the best way to record history.
What advice do you give to news publishers today who are torn at their relevance? I'm going to use that term to the communities they serve. How should they, in your humble opinion, sir, honor their own legacy?
Well, like Ben Bradley said, get the facts. By the way, I worked with Ben Bradley when I helped consult on automating the newsroom at the Washington Post. He was a very dynamic editor. Again, I've consulted for many of the big newspapers in America, and I have to tell you, the editors in those days were the greatest people on earth. They had an adherence to facts, documentation, getting it right, and putting it down in cohesive form. I don't see that today. I see long articles that go on forever, imbued with opinion rather than facts.
That, sir, is here coming from a gentleman who was mostly on the operations side, giving, I would say, the best advice ever. People ask me all over now, Frank, what's the secret sauce? What works? And I always say, just do good storytelling. Every time we see a winning operation, they're doing the facts. Frank Romano, possibly the most prolific historian of printing and the founder of the Museum of Printing in Haverhill, Mass., and more importantly, the author now of almost 80 books. Do I have that right, sir?
You got that right. On
typography, print history, and publishing. Frank, you keep up the work, and more importantly, just keep going. Stay in this industry. We need you so we can feel anchored. Thanks so much for your time, Frank.
And thank you very much for doing what you're doing. And by the way, bringing back radio.
Hear, hear.